Hello, welcome to another edition of Labor's Worldview TV. I'm your host, David Johnson. Today we have three special guests to talk about the sex work trade and workers' rights within that profession, as well as unionization. So stay tuned. Hello, welcome to Labor's Worldview TV. Could you introduce yourselves to our viewers?
Absolutely. My name is Stefanie Smith, and I am running in the Democratic primary for Illinois' 13th congressional seat. The primary is March 17th. Make sure you get out and vote.
Okay.
I am Z. Snyder. I work on the campaign, and I am a sex worker, and I work in food service.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Allison Martell. I also work on the Stefanie Smith campaign. I am a barista and a food service worker. I'm also a local stand-up comedian. You may have seen me as the Beast around town.
Okay, very good. So this segment we want to talk about sex workers and basically the profession of, I hate to use the word sex trade because that sounds ominous, but I guess I call it the sex profession. Is that appropriate?
Right, yeah. And I mean, honestly, I think sex trade is a kinder way of framing it than saying trafficking.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Because it allows us to look at it the way that we look at other labor, including things like domestic work, which involves trafficking as well. That's actually predominantly where labor trafficking occurs, not in sex trafficking. So I think that saying sex trade actually feels pretty good to me.
Yeah.
So where would you like to start on this broad topic?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people don't understand that these issues are relevant in our district, in Champaign-Urbana, all around, everywhere. These are issues that are affecting people. And through activism in our community and networking, the three of us realized there are actually closer ties to the service industry and the sex industry than we had initially thought. I have also worked in food service predominantly most of my life, and I have also worked as an exotic dancer at various clubs in Illinois, and I did underage survival work when I was younger.
What do you mean by underage survival work?
So I take issue with legislation that classifies me as a child sex trafficking survivor. In Illinois, if you're under 18, you're automatically considered sex trafficked, regardless of the presence of a trafficker. So I feel like that obfuscates the role that poverty had in my work. I'm what would have been called a throwaway. So those are kids like runaways, oftentimes LGBTQ children that get pushed out into the street. And so I started doing sex work as a means to meet my basic needs. I started exchanging sex for shelter and food and that sort of thing. So when I say survival sex worker, that's what I'm referring to, because no one was trafficking me. The conditions that caused that in my life are related to poverty and a lack of community resources for things like healthcare, mental health care. I grew up in a very abusive environment. And so those are the issues that I think that we need to be looking at when we talk about sex work, instead of this false idea that it's people from outside of the community coming in and taking children from like an IKEA parking lot. Like, that's not how it works.
Okay.
So I think one of the things that, if it's all right, we could share a personal story about how we sort of realized how close this tie was. Allison, do you want to talk about that when you got the card?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess it wasn't something that happened on the clock, but it was definitely something that happened while I was in a space where folks who work in food service tend to hang out and socialize. I was hanging out with some fellow baristas at the time. I was with another woman. I'm a lesbian. By the way, I probably should have mentioned that. It only comes up every 5 seconds. Yeah, this was a woman that I was hanging out with at this bar. And we were actually approached by a strange man in that bar who inquired whether or not we were interested in doing porn, which was not at all what we were looking for in that space at the time. But it started an interesting conversation because the three of us are all people who have worked in food service, and we sort of saw this vulnerable place where people who are affected economically by poverty, by low wages, people who are struggling to make ends meet, when somebody comes up and offers a hunk of money like that, it's a very exploitable situation.
Yeah.
I imagine sometimes it could be as much as a week's salary.
Oh, yeah, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean that's part of the issue is that I wasn't really. I don't have a background in sex work. I'm not very knowledgeable about how to keep myself safe in a situation like that.
Yeah.
So I could have seen myself being in a very scary situation. And that's not even to say that, I guess, I guess that's what I have to say about it, is that I was in a position where I wasn't really equipped to protect myself. And there was clearly a man there who was looking for people like me,
Right.
working jobs like what I was working.
Yeah.
People who were going to feel like they didn't have
So
other
I see
options.
already
Yeah.
there's sort of a connection here with, low-wage service
Yes.
work,
Yeah.
Yeah.
food service, maybe in particular, maybe bar work,
Yes.
perhaps.
Yeah. So
Okay.
what happened is Allison just briefly posted about that interaction. And then Zed and I, because there aren't a lot of people who are vocally outspoken
Right.
about these issues around here, Zed and I immediately just like swooping and burn the card, get rid of the number. And
I think my comment was like, this is actually what I do for a living, so if you need help, I will be the one to help you.
yeah, Zed was like, I've got cameras and equipment.
Yeah, like,
and then
throw that card away and we'll get you started yourself if this is really something you're interested in. But don't, like, a strange man walking up to you in a bar and being like, hey, here's my business card if you want to get naked for me. No, don't
Don't
trust
do it.
Don't trust
don't
it.
do it.
Say no, walk away. No. Because even me, I'm a sex worker. I'm not going to ever approach someone and say, like I would have, if I didn't know who you were and you were talking to someone, it doesn't matter, like talking to a guy, talking to a girl, it doesn't matter. I would never be like, hey.
Do you have a cam?
No, I think you look amazing in porn. That's terrible. And that's not how we do it. So immediately I could recognize, oh no, that's not safe.
Did you get into your profession because of economic survival issues, or was it more not so
Yeah.
much so? Or
I think I've always worked in some sort of like sex work. Like I sold nudes online and I made enough to buy a plane ticket to move to Illinois, and that's how I got here. So like I've always been sort of, in some way involved in sex type work.
Okay.
And it's always been something where like it's always going to be out there. Like I'm always going to have that out there. So it's something that I kind of, at some point, instead of being like, oh, I have to separate my life from this, thing I do, I kind of was like, whatever.
Okay. Well, you probably know that most countries in the world, prostitution's legal.
Yeah.
It's not even decriminalized here in the United States. Did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, so modes of, like the frameworks around legalization get really complicated because they bring in things like taxation and lots of regulation. So I am actually a proponent of decriminalization. And there's a really good analog in what we're seeing with regard to marijuana policy, because marijuana is legalized, but who still gets arrested for street drugs and that sort of thing when we don't have that decriminalization component? So my concern with legalization is that if we have legalized prostitution, we are going to have the Amazon of brothels, right? And the poor workers are still going to be criminalized. They're still going to be facing the same issues that affect their ability to get housing and work. So for me, decriminalization is really, really important. We'll hear people talking a lot about things like the Nordic model, which is a partial decriminalization. That criminalizes the clients, and that drives the work further underground. It means that workers are more likely to get dangerous clients because it scares away the more law-abiding clients. So that method actually increases danger. There are ways that it has been used to kick people out of their homes. For example, if a worker is taking clients in their home, the landlord can be charged for running a brothel, so they evict, right? Also, part of in demand is frequently if somebody were to give you a ride to work or pick you up to make sure that you're safe, that person can be charged with pimping or trafficking because they are helping you do your work.
And that's under decriminalized.
That's under
Yeah.
partial decriminalization.
I'm glad you brought up this Nordic.
Yeah.
You're talking primarily about Sweden, correct?
Yeah, like when we think about
because
like
Norway still
Amsterdam
is legal.
too.
And
Yeah.
from what I understand, I was reading some, this issue came up a while back on Facebook, and my wife's from Germany originally. I've been to Germany many times. I've been to other countries in Europe, and it's, legal. It's prostitutes pay taxes, they get Social Security, they get national health care, and they get legal protections if they're, physically battered or abused and that. From what I understand, in Sweden, they decriminalized it, and a lot of prostitutes are saying now that they get fined, if they're like arrested. And also, once they get fined, they start bringing, if the prostitutes have children, they start bringing in child custody agencies to threaten to take their children away. So what's happened, from what I've been reading, this is blog postings from various prostitutes, is that they're having to go to across the border to Norway for 3 or 4 days at a time to earn a living and come back to Sweden. So that seems to be, we seem to be like there's, with decriminalization versus legalization, that there's kind of pitfalls to each.
Yes, to a certain extent. So, and generally, like, our community uses the term sex work instead of prostitute, just because we consider that like the language of law enforcement. Like, in trying to build a workers' movement.
I wasn't coming from a law enforcement perspective, more kind of, I guess, academic, for lack of a better word.
No, you're all good.
Okay.
I mean, this is the stuff that we want people to know so that people feel like they can engage on these topics.
Right.
Like, this is our job. So what you're talking about with custody, that is something that happens with partial decriminalization. And I actually hate that language. I feel like they should call it like partial criminalization.
Right. Yeah.
Because decriminalization would not
Involve
do that.
Yeah.
And in terms of like labor policy and that sort of thing, I don't think that we have the network in place in the political sphere to actually make meaningful legislation right now because they have pushed so many workers to the margins. And it has taken us decades just to get to the point where we could talk about decriminalization in a newspaper.
Yes, it almost seems like there's a similarity here between undocumented workers in the sense that documented workers are more exploitable. In other words, they can't, they're afraid to go to the authorities for abuses on, labor, how they're treated, how they're paid. And it almost seems like the same economic interests.
It is.
Okay.
And that is exactly why we want to talk about it as a labor continuum instead of this notion of, like, are you a sex worker or a trafficking victim? It's not black and white like that. There are shades all throughout, right? Because what happens is somebody may have been a trafficking victim, but then they turned 18, and so now they're a criminal.
Yeah.
Automatically?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay, can you explain that? Maybe you did earlier, but I don't quite see
so under the
legal.
laws, if it's under 18, you're automatically a trafficking victim.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So somebody like me, like a throwaway, for example, up until their 18th birthday is considered a victim of sex trafficking.
Okay, then once you turn 18?
You're a criminal. You're a prostitute.
What you're saying. Okay.
So they actually...
I thought you were saying that they automatically became considered a trafficker as opposed to a trafficked victim.
Sometimes.
Okay.
That happens as well. Workers oftentimes get charged with trafficking each other because if you work in pairs
Or
for
support group of some
safety,
kind.
right?
Mhm.
Like taking advantage of these laws around like pimping and trafficking. You know, some people, again, going back to this notion of like a landlord being held responsible
Okay.
for running a brothel. Like there are things where if you live with a sex worker and the sex worker uses money from their job to pay their rent, anybody who's a roommate in that house is considered a pimp.
Okay.
And that's like the laws vary throughout the country.
What would you like to see as far as national legislation? I mean, do you think it pretty much would have to be national as opposed to state by state, or do you think it's good, maybe like with the marijuana legalization, that it's had to go state by state?
I would push for a national decriminalization movement. However,
And what would that look like?
well, the problem that we have right now is that it would require overturning a Supreme Court case that I can't recall the name of off the top of my head, but it was a case that determined it was states' rights and like the purview of more local municipalities to regulate sex work. So there's a lot of work that would need to be done for a national push for
Okay.
decriminalization, which is why if a federal candidate is talking about this stuff and they don't mention that, they don't know their stuff, don't
Okay.
trust them. But I think the biggest thing that would help not just sex workers in real life, dancers, cam workers, but also the LGBTQ community and other marginalized communities would be the repeal of FOSTA.
Which is,
So we hear a lot about SESTA, FOSTA. SESTA is the House bill. FOSTA was the Senate equivalent. Woodhull Freedom Foundation is currently challenging it on the grounds that it's unconstitutional. But it was bipartisan supported legislation that was designed to go after sex traffickers, but really they wanted to go after one platform in particular, that's Backpage. And
that's what I'm sorry?
Backpage,
Which is what?
that was an adult services sort of, think Craigslist,
Okay.
but for adult services.
Okay, okay.
And it was a really, really important tool that workers used to screen clients. They could leave ratings, and they were able to talk about which clients were violent and dangerous. It was a massive loss to our community to
Okay.
lose that. It made work so much more dangerous. Homicides went up. It's terrifying. And so how does it do that though, right? Like you want to hear about the mechanisms of it. Well, it weakens Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. So what it does is it makes it so that platforms become responsible for the user-generated content. It's like the landlord being a brothel owner sort of thing, right? So it says that if Z posts on Instagram about a camming event, then Facebook is on the hook for it because they own Instagram. Right. And so what happened with that was a chilling effect. We got wide-scale censorship of anything related to sex work. There's a big problem here because sex work is oftentimes, especially in terms of like technology and algorithms, incredibly racist, sexist, misogynistic.
Right.
And so a lot of the tags that are used for sex work are tags that actually belong to LGBTQ communities and minorities because we're heavily fetishized, which means that if you tag a post as lesbian, you might get your account banned or your stuff taken off because they might consider it porn without even looking at it. Like it's got the tag on it. And this happens too with minorities in particular, people of color, like Black trans women. It happens to a lot because all of these markers that we use for identity are the same ones that the pornography algorithms use in their coding.
Okay, so you'd like to see that basically repealed, that
Yes,
law?
yes.
And what else as far as, I don't know, what you'd like to see as far as decriminalization? I mean, just basically that it would no one be arrested, or, I mean, how would that work?
Yes, so ideally, no one would be
Yeah.
arrested. And that would allow street-based workers to actually report crimes and assaults against them. It would allow them to network with law enforcement to actually get sex traffickers. This is an important point. Workers do not want traffickers.
Yeah.
Like, we are against that. You
Yeah.
won't find anybody more against that, I think, than like the sex worker community.
Yeah.
Because we actually know the realities of what that looks like, and it's terrifying. Like,
Yeah.
the reason that we are doing this activism is because we are seeing this notion of trafficking being exploited in a xenophobic way to enact policies that are actually going to further punish
Yeah.
marginalized
But even if it
communities.
was decriminalized, or even if it fully legalized, I mean, would there still be a need for, well, not just support groups, but say unionization to protect each other's economic as well as safety rights?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, Z, do you want to speak a little bit about the sort of issues that happen with like PayPal? and
Yeah.
that-
So there's right. I mean, it's essentially the same thing that Stephanie was talking about with like Facebook being on the hook if someone posts something that could. It's basically there's a lot of rules in place where any sort of solicitation is what is part of what's forbidden. So like, let's say you post something on Instagram and like Instagram's a big one because a lot of sex workers that are mainstream, like porn stars, are having their accounts completely like deleted, removed. I had my Instagram account, it was just removed without warning. There was no explanation. It was just taken down because I didn't get a reason, but their reason for doing it is if you solicit anything, like, oh, if you want to see this, if you want to see that, or like, here's where to go. I didn't do that. I just said, I'm uploading a video to Pornhub, and immediately my account got taken down. So places like PayPal, they are basically, I mean, most sex workers that I know do not use PayPal because they will have their account taken down. When that happens, it means that any money that you have on there, PayPal does not give that to you. They keep that and they seize that and they do not return that. And their reason for that could be nothing. They could just say, "Oh, your account is suspicious." But what are you supposed to do if you're a sex worker? Oh no, it's not suspicious. It was a client. Of what? What were you doing? What were you selling? What were you? Then you like they can bring the police into it. It can be very, very, very unsafe. And like there goes your rent. There goes your food. There goes any way that you are able to like survive. So PayPal is, I mean, like there was another one, Circle Pay. I think that one got removed. That one was one that a lot of sex workers were using. I believe it's Circle Pay. That one got completely, like they just stopped, they stopped existing basically. But PayPal is one, and this is for me, it's a big thing. PayPal will remove an account from a sex worker that does not use PayPal as their income for sex work. So let's say they see that your Twitter has sex work on it, but your PayPal is set up for when, like let's say you have a service job and you guys are like, we're going to pool and we're going to buy lunch, and you have like, okay, well, I'll pay you back for this, or I'll pay, people use PayPal just for random things.
Yeah.
They will seize your account just because you're a sex worker. It doesn't have to have anything to do with sex work.
So that'd be one
So,
positive
yeah.
change, is to
Oh,
basically
yeah.
stop them from doing that.
I mean, yeah, but it's just, I mean, that's just one aspect of
Yeah,
it.
sure.
We're literally like, your funds, like, I know artists that like, they're graphic designers and they use PayPal for that. They'll have their account deleted because there's no way to prove that you're not using it for sex or porn or anything like that, because someone is, it's artwork that you're selling. There's no way that you can prove otherwise, so they just take down your account and people don't get their money that they've received on PayPal, and they just freeze it, and then they say it's suspicious, and you don't have any right to your money. And like, what are you
Well, it
supposed to do?
sounds like a convenient way for them to steal people's money.
Exactly.
It is.
It is.
It
I mean,
is.
basically, yes. Sex workers are completely erased. They are dehumanized in every capacity. And like SESTA and FOSTA is just another way to punish them for someone else's crime. Like
Okay.
someone else is the criminal here, and sex workers are the ones that are on the hook for it.
Okay.
And there's no reason for that. It's
Okay.
like, let's say, I mean, like Backpage, it was used as a safety tool for sex workers, and they removed it. And now, like the homicide rate immediately, like as soon as that was taken down, like immediately the homicide rate just jumped.
Right.
See that,
Like
sure,
we're
sure.
literally being hunted.
Yes.
There are people on the border that are hunting and murdering sex workers. We're seeing reports come out everywhere. I really can't overstate how horrifying it is, and that, you know, Z is doing what would be considered safer sex work by doing it online, and they are eradicating that option by seizing assets, and there's no legal recourse for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, you'd think that the right thing to do is, okay, we're going to refund your money, but you're not going to have an account here
Right,
anymore.
yeah. I mean, like, I could understand. I'd be like,
mean-
okay, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
But they don't, they say that because, like, they can't, they're, you know, it's suspicious. You're, you know, doing something wrong. You're doing something illegal, so we can't give you your money. And it's like, no, I'm just selling people nudes.
So, Stephanie, before the program, you were telling me that you used to work at some clubs in central Illinois, and it kind of, well, some of your experiences doing that, some of your bad experience, and also you said there's been some efforts nationwide in other states for sex workers to unionize, and that there's actually been a porn star who's been being used to try to bust the sex workers organizing. This is an incredible story.
Yeah, so I started working at Big Al's in Peoria, Illinois when I was 18 years old. And I had learned about it's called the Lusty Lady out in San Francisco. Siobhan Brooks, who is now a very accomplished sociologist, was then a dancer there, and she's a black woman. She filed a racial discrimination suit because they were giving all of the high money shifts to lighter skinned dancers. And I actually saw similar things happening at the clubs that I had worked at. There, like, some places wouldn't allow more than one African American girl on lineup at once, for example. So this was the late 90s, early 2000s, and she won that racial discrimination suit, and then they began the effort to unionize Lusty Lady, and they were successful. There was the Exotic Dancer Union became an affiliate of the Service Employees International Union, which is, again, what we're talking about with these, like, this is all service.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? It's just, you know, like coffee versus butts. So, yeah, and at the time they were a member of AFL-CIO Local 790. So I had seen that happen, and I was really, really excited. And I had tried to garner interest amongst my peers there, but what I found was that we were so exploited and our jobs were so at risk that it wasn't safe enough for us to do it back then. And I know a lot of people don't understand how it works, but when you're a dancer, you're an independent contractor here. And I can talk a little bit about California law that has changed recently, but for my experience in here, you're an independent contractor. And it works a little bit like it does for hair salons, right? In theory, you pay a house fee to rent the space to work.
Well, then on top of that, you have to pay for your own health care. You're responsible for 33% tax rate because you have to do the employer and the employee contribution to Social Security and Medicare, as well as your payroll tax. So yeah, you're getting charged 33% tax rate, plus you have to pay for your own health care.
Yes.
No unemployment insurance if you're laid off, and plus you have to pay a house fee.
Yes, and more.
And more.
Are you
Yeah.
ready? So the house fees where I was working were usually between $50 and $75 a night. However, they would sometimes get up into the hundreds. As an independent contractor, we should have been allowed to make our own schedules. That was not the case. They would schedule us, and if you called in for a shift that you had been scheduled for, you were required to bring in a doctor's note. Now, I didn't have insurance, and they didn't offer insurance. So, you know, for example, I wasn't able to work on a Friday. I had told them I couldn't work that Friday. They kept me on the schedule anyway, and then I wasn't allowed to work my Saturday night shift until I paid them $300.
Whoa.
That was the fee for missing a shift. Now, also, people frequently get fines and fees if they're late getting on stage, if they don't sell merchandise. I was required at Club Cabaret, every hour on the half hour, we had to do merchandise dances in which we would walk around with like branded shot glasses, trucker hats, golf towels, like all sorts. Nobody wants this stuff.
Yeah,
there were
give me
golf
one of
towels,
those.
right?
Can I get 2 golf towels?
Yeah. Oh my God, the string bikini satin panties were the worst because, like, what man wants to take those home after being out at the club, right? Like, that was dumb. That's dumber than the trucker hat. But that's beside the point. I had to sell those panties every hour on the half hour to a bunch of men that didn't want them, and I would have to buy them with my own money and do the dance for free.
Oh my God.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So every hour on the half hour, I did that on top of paying $50 a night to work there. People really have no idea what goes into this. One of the worst experiences in my life happened at Deja Vu in Springfield, Illinois, and that's a chain. Stormy Daniels is currently promoting Deja Vu. They are very, very active in anti-unionizing efforts. My experience at Deja Vu, I was
The same Stormy Daniels that was that got a payoff from Trump.
Yeah,
Wow.
absolutely.
Boy.
It's what a tangled web.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many people that they get involved, and a lot of times this is survival for us. We're talking about working class sex workers, right? Like, there are a lot of issues that I'm sure people like Stormy Daniels and the more mainstream stars face. But like what we're talking about, this is the stuff that actually impacts everyday
And that's the vast
people.
majority, I assume, of
Yes.
sex work.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So just don't trust people that promote themselves over issues and causes,
Right.
Especially when it comes to
Yeah.
sex work.
Yeah.
But Deja Vu, I was 18. I started the job with my roommate. They have peep shows there, as well as the dance floor. And she felt uncomfortable with the idea of men being able to touch her. Whereas the peep show, you're behind a booth, like somebody deposits money, a curtain opens, and then usually there's a phone that you talk to them. It's sort of like a jail.
So you're behind glass then.
Behind glass,
Okay.
yeah, and then they put the money in to open the curtain. That's how Deja Vu makes their money on the booth, and then there's a place for tips, and so that's how the dancers make their money, or booth girls. But so we paid a house fee to be able to have access to a booth, and the clients, they masturbate in there, and they're really disgusting about it, and they make a mess. And so our first day at Deja Vu, management called in the police to meet us, and the police asked us to come perform at a party for them, and we declined. Later on, while working at Deja Vu, management then forced myself and my roommate to clean up years-old crusted ejaculate, which oxidizes to a rust color, by the way, in our lingerie and heels with nothing but rubber gloves, Lysol, and a roll of paper towels while they laughed. So
And that was because they were angry that you wouldn't cooperate with having a party for the Springfield police.
correct. So
Okay.
the only people who tried to traffic me, even like I was a survival sex worker, and the only people who tried to traffic me were law enforcement after I turned 18 from a legal club. And that is why we need decriminalization and not legalization.
Right. Yeah.
But if there was legalization, you're saying that that would present. I'm confused on this because to me it seems like legalization would be the more appropriate, or I should say the the better route. I mean, so I'm still kind of confused about why you would think decriminalization would be better than legalization.
Because of the regulation, right?
So I was going to say, I feel like it's because of language. Like legalization sounds safer than decriminalization, but that's just linguistics. Like it
Okay,
really is just like legalization basically means that like you said, like eventually we'd have an Amazon of sex work, which means that someone could profit and still exploit. Like strip clubs are legal.
Right. Yeah. Oh.
And it is exploitable legally.
Okay.
So legalization isn't going to take any of that away.
Right.
Okay.
So decriminalization is taking it. It's just coming in and being like, okay, we're done with how this is being operated.
But under decriminalization, you'd still be fined.
No.
No?
No.
Because
Okay.
it's decriminalizing.
Right.
it.
Yeah. So under decriminalization, we could eradicate
Yeah.
fines.
Okay.
That
So
sort
under
of thing.
decriminalization, would you be able to pay in onto Social Security?
No.
And if we had and when we get a Medicare for all health care in this country, would be able to pay in on that? Because that's
No.
okay.
So
And
that's-
also one other thing I know from the European experience is that also sex workers are required, not dancers, but ones who actually do sex, are required to have a health exam once a month to have their license current.
And you can see a lot of those same things happen in the brothel models out in Nevada.
Okay.
But for example, at one of the brothels, it's illegal for any of the dancers to leave the premises without a sheriff escort, and they are not allowed to even be in the towns without a sheriff escort.
Oh, wow.
For example. So that's what happens when you have legalization. And so for us, it's really important that we make this push for decriminalization to set that groundwork and then build a labor
Right,
movement
right.
on top of
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
Right? But we have to have that component first. Otherwise, the same people who are being hurt now are going to be hurt when you know, big box brothel
Right.
opens up. But the most succinct way for me to describe it, and I
That was
cannot-
very well put, by the way. I mean, I
Yeah.
cleared it up pretty well for me anyway.
Yeah, we're against the criminalization and industrialization
Right.
Okay.
of
Right.
sex
Okay.
work, basically. So, but we have to have that decriminalized
Yeah.
element as the ground
Yeah.
floor to build
Okay.
a
Base.
real
Yeah.
labor movement.
Okay, we're kind of running out of time, so I want to turn back to Allison since you haven't had beginning you had a little bit of opportunity to speak, but I wanted to make sure you had some more things to say if you'd like about, service work, restaurant work.
Yeah, I mean, as we've already talked about, I mean, there are a lot of connections and a lot of parallels between the labor issues that affect sex workers and the labor issues that affect people in the food service industry. I mean, my biggest concerns are low wages would be the big one. Champaign actually hasn't raised the minimum wage in 10 years, over 10 years now, which is something that is within the city's.
What is the rate for,
$8.25 an hour is the minimum
Okay.
wage.
But,
yeah,
but for
Just
servers,
for-
it's
Right.
Oh, yeah.
$4.95 an hour.
$4.95?
Yes.
That's ridiculous.
Right.
And plus, you have to do. I mean, from what I understand, is when they made a change to the tax code back in the early '80s under the Reagan administration, that servers are going to be assumed to make 10% of whatever the bill is.
Right.
Whether it happens or not.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, not a good situation.
Yeah, no, not at all. So that's a big concern for me. I'm concerned about safety issues and things that go on within the restaurant. I'm worried about people not having enough hours.
It's very common for people to do split shifts. And basically, it means that a server has to work from 9 in the morning until 9 o'clock at night, and they get a 2-hour break in between, basically. But they don't get overtime or anything
Right.
like
And
that.
sometimes a lot of servers have to work, run back and forth between
Yeah.
2 or 3 different places. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, that's another thing that I was going to bring up too. Was something you see a lot is you'll see an employer cut somebody off at exactly 30 hours.
Yeah.
Because any more than 30 would be considered full time, and then they're on the hook for benefits and things like that. So you see a lot of people working part-time jobs that are actually 30 hours, and then they end up working 2. So their weeks look more like 60 hours.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
but they're technically part-time
So what do you
workers.
think would be a good first step solution to this, ultimate solution?
I'm looking for a food service union.
Okay.
I'd like an umbrella union that could cover a lot of different businesses,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of different kinds of workers within
Okay.
the industry. I think, I think the first step needs to be that workers need to have a way to represent themselves, look out for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think, ultimately, I think food service workers are going to be the ones that know best about how to improve the industry, not just for us too, but for customers.
Yeah.
When employees are taken care of, that makes for better service.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're just, we kind of run out of time, but I want to
Yeah.
make sure that any last words, so to speak, before we go.
Vote Steph for Congress.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. This has been very, not just interesting, but informative on my part. I thought I was pretty well up on the issue, and I learned a lot today. So
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Thank
This
you.
has been amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.